God, I just hate you. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you with everything that's in me. And God, I want to make this pledge that I will never love you and I will never serve you in any way whatsoever, because I just hate you so much, because you've taken my dad. Because you've taken my dad.
Hello, I am Charles Miller. I am the pastor of the Ministry Road. Many people call me Mr. C. I'm getting ready to share a very incredible story about a man named George Palmer. George was a mob boss and a gangster in Australia. George had developed an extreme hatred towards God because of something that happened to him very unfortunately at an early age. When George found out and heard the news that the Reverend Billy Graham was going to be preaching a crusade in Melbourne, Australia, he rallied his gang in the arena where Billy Graham was preaching that night and plotted to assassinate the Reverend Billy Graham. This is an incredible story of how God himself intervened, and he audibly heard God's voice, and God took his hardened heart and immediately changed it into a heart of love. Please stay with me right now as I introduce to you and tell you the amazing story of God's love of Mr. George Palmer.
Now I want you to turn with me to the second chapter of John's Gospel. The second chapter, and I hope everybody has a Bible tonight.
It's good to be here with you to share with you, Charles. And I just want to say from the beginning that this has really very little to do with me, but it's everything to do with what the Lord can do with a person in a person's life and in their heart. My story begins when I was very young. I was angry before anything else happened because I didn't grow like other kids grew, and I had a lot of trouble at school because I was so small. The kids used to pick on me, and then my father took very sick and was rushed to hospital, and it was there he had a heart attack and wasn't supposed to live. And when we got the news through to say that my dad had died, I was shattered. Now, my dad wasn't the best dad in the world. He used to drink and quite often came home drunk. But when no alcohol was involved, he was a wonderful man, and I loved him very, very much. But I remember getting the news and hearing the news about him dying. And I remember rushing out the back door up into the top paddock where he planted all those trees. And I remember yelling and screaming out at God, God, I just hate you. I hate you with everything that's in me. And God, I want to make this pledge that I will never love you and I will never serve you in any way whatsoever, because I just hate you so much because you've taken my dad. And that set the scene then for perhaps the rest of my life, Charles. The next day when I went to school, I was just so angry. I was just boiling over. And anyway, one of the kids turned to me and called me a dwarf. And I just turned around and I smacked him in the face and knocked all his front teeth out. And I was given 6 cuts. I was sent to the headmaster and given another 6 cuts. And that set the scene of my school life. If I didn't average 6 cuts a day, there was something wrong, something absolutely wrong. I became an obnoxious, foul-mouthed little boy, and little in the sense of being a small person. My uncle used to call me the little runt of the family, and that didn't enhance me to him at all. because I hated being called that. Absolutely hated being called that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George, I want you to maybe explain to everybody, because certainly you have a situation in your life whereas you was so hardened towards God, as you just now explained to us, George. Just as in the Bible where the Lord said that Herod's heart was hardened, whereas no matter what God did up to a certain point, it seemed to just not make any difference whatsoever because it was hardened. Hatred was embedded in your heart because you was, I guess, so disappointed of a loss of your father that you loved dearly, and you didn't understand why, in your opinion, instead of blaming the devil, you blamed God. What does a hatred heart do to somebody? How does that feel? How does it grow? Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, I think personally, to me, I think it's like a cancer. And this cancer grows inside you. Nobody can see it. But you know it's there and it's growing. And you're getting, the least little thing would just make you so angry that the display that you displayed was not really of you. And people were surprised about it. I changed schools. I went to the Albury Grammar School in New South Wales. And I went there because they were a school that's very, very strict. But I only lasted there about 6 months before I was expelled because of this continuous exhibition of hatred and anger that I had in my life. And I see it in so many of our young people today, the same thing. The same thing I see in them was actually in me today, was in me back there then.
Well, George, I remember you telling me that your mother was religious. She took you to church, so you did know something about God, and so I know that this led you into an area of working with a gang. You became the leader of a gang. Explain what happened to you. How did your life transpire from that? However, let me say this before you start with that, Brother George. Your life, you knew about God. There are many moms out there or fathers out there that are praying for a wayward child. And I guess I would say to them, and I know you would say to them, don't give up. Because no matter how wayward that child is or seems to be right now, or how impossible or hopeless it might be, your mother was praying for you. And even though it looked bleak, tell us about what happened to you at that point when you became a teenager, when you became older in life, which led up to your desire to assassinate, to kill Billy Graham. The hatred grew so intensely for you to actually have that much of a hardened heart. What became of you after that? What became of you? Tell us about the gang.
Well, I think, Charles, we ended up selling the farm, and we moved to Melbourne, and there I went to Footscray Technical School. Now they started at 2A was the top, and the lowest they could get was 2N, and that's where I ended up because that's where all the no-hopers were, in 2N, and I displayed my anger right throughout the whole of my school life, was there all the time. And then I finally got an apprenticeship with the Victorian Railways, and I got an apprenticeship as an electrical fitter, and I went through my apprenticeship with this anger and hatred to anybody. It didn't matter who they were. If somebody had said something to me that annoyed me, I would pick up a chisel and throw at them, whether it hit them or not. I didn't care. It was just a display of this uncontrollable anger that I had in my life. And then in my second year, just halfway through my second year apprenticeship, we were transferred down to Newport workshops, just out of Melbourne, and we served about 2 years down there. And while I was there, I heard about this group that met, and I went to talk to them about it, and they sort of laughed at me at first and said, "Okay, you can be our midget, you can be our little midget man." And that made me even worse. And just then, after I'd been in the gang about probably 3 to 6 months, the leader of the gang then got a call from America to say that his parents over there were dying and that he needed to go over there to them. And so they were without a leader. Now, to choose a leader of the gang, what they did was that they heated a piece of 3 8-round steel up red hot and put it in the top of your leg. And if you didn't pass out with the pain, then you became the leader. And there was only 2 of us went for it. I was the mug that was able to withstand the pain, and so I became the leader. Now, being the leader, whatever I said went. There was no disputation at all about anything that I'd said. And of course, then in 1959, or before 1959 it was, we heard that this man, Billy Graham, was coming to Melbourne to conduct a crusade.
And I think it's very important that we find out what is a born-again Christian and what is a born-again Christian supposed to be like. And how do you become born again? Now, I don't mean how do you become a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, how do you become born again? Have a new birth. And I want us to talk about that tonight. In the last 2 verses, a great crowd of people were following Jesus in this 2nd chapter, but Jesus did not commit himself unto them because he knew all men, and needed not that any should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. There was a man of the Pharisees now in this crowd named Nicodemus, a ruler. The same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Teacher, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus saith unto him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he...
And we talked it over, and we said, let's get this guy. He stands, and we hate Christianity. And so that's what we planned on doing. And during the time I was in the railways, the workshops, I made up 10 zip guns. And so each member had a zip gun. Now, they're very dangerous things because they can blow up in your face quite easily. So we decided this was the way we were going to get back at God, through getting at Billy Graham, because he was God's man at that stage.
Why?
And
why Billy Graham? Let me. Am I calling this right? Am I thinking about it this way correctly, George? Why Billy Graham? God had you thought in your young heart when you was young, God had taken your father from you. So is that the way you was thinking about Billy Graham, that you would take something from God? Was that the reason why such hate for Billy Graham? Tell us about that. I know you're going into that part of the story, but what caused you to hate Billy Graham so much? What started that?
I think it was payback time, Charles. Payback time. Wow. God had taken from me, now we were going to take from him. And he was such a high-profile man, that we thought, this is the man we've got to get. This is the man we've got to get, you know. And so when we heard that he was coming, and he was going to do a crusade on the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Now, the Melbourne Cricket Ground is a very large ground, and it holds nearly, I think, 100,000 people. And it was full. But we'd stationed ourselves around the wire fences. But then a miracle happened. Well, it was, God is so sneaky. He really is so sneaky, you know. We say a miracle happened. They opened the gates onto the green. And so I said to the guys, come on, let's go. We're on the green, we'll get closer to him. So we went on to the green and we stationed ourselves around. Now, I could see every guy that was there. I knew them, I saw them. And we hid our guns under our jumpers. And I have no idea what was said that night. I have no idea what Billy Graham preached on.
I was going to ask you what the message was that made you make the decision, because as ministers, so many times I know myself, George, that I think that if I could prepare the correct sermon, the right words, the perfect homiletical outline, a sermon, that's what it would take, and I never ever could come up with that sermon. It always was the Holy Spirit that preached the right thing to somebody's heart. So I was going to ask you, what in the world did Billy Graham preach that night that made you change your mind? But you saying that you did not even hear the sermon?
Never ever heard the sermon, Charles. I as a matter of fact, I'll get to it a little later on, but about halfway through this procedure, I'm looking around at all these people, and there's 143,000 people there. There's never been a bigger crowd than that on the Melbourne Cricket Ground since. And so I'm looking around at all these people, and I thought, what the dickens are all these stupid people doing here? I said, they must be mad or something. You know, there's something wrong with them. Because I used to think Christians used to have two brains, you know. One was lost and the other one was out looking for it, you know. And that was my attitude towards Christians. And I looked around and I a little later on said the same thing again. And then I turned back, and then suddenly somebody said to me, well, what are you doing here, George? I thought, well, who the dickens knows me here? So I turned around to have a look. No, I couldn't see anybody. I didn't know anybody. So I turned back around again. And you know, 3 times that happened to me, Charles. 3 times. And you know, it was amazing, because in my mind came flooding back something that I'd learned at Sunday school about Moses and the burning bush. And God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. And I thought to myself, surely this is not God speaking to a foul-mouthed little brat, George Palmer. And 3 times God said that. What are you doing here, George? And that's when I recognized it was him, and him speaking to me. And it was just so amazing. And I'll tell you what, for the first time in my life, Charles, I was scared. I was really, really scared, you know. Now, I said to you that I didn't know whether or not what Billy Graham preached. I have no idea. And I also don't know for a fact whether or not the choir sang "Just as I am," without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me. Now, I have no idea whether the choir sang that, but I heard it. I heard it in my mind. It was just astounding, because I think that was the thing that really, really changed me, when I realized suddenly that God himself had done something so that this person, this foul-mouthed little man, might find life and life abundantly. It was just so amazing. And God said to me, I remember him saying to me the last time he spoke to me, George, I didn't take your father to hurt you. I didn't take your father to hurt your mother or you. I took him because he was a sick man. And he died just like you will die, and everybody else around you will die. And it all seemed to make so much sense. And suddenly, for the first time since I was 7.5 years of age, I began to weep. And the tears just streamed down my face, Charles. And it was just like a refreshing rain. You know how after it's been hot and it rains, you get that beautiful smell of the rain. It was just like that. There was this beautiful smell, I think, of life, real life. And at the invitation, I almost ran out to the front. And it was amazing.
It was you and 9 other of the gang members that was stationed around the arena. And I imagine you thought that one of you guys was going to get to Billy Graham and take him out. Billy Graham didn't know it. The crowd didn't know it. You knew it, and 9 other of the gang members knew it, and God knew it, but God would not allow it.
No, that's right.
I'm going to ask you right now, because I remember, I'm going to ask you to share another story with us while I have you, and that was, I remember how hardened your heart was at one time. You had a gang fight at one time, and just to show how hardened your heart was and what God changed, I'd like you to share that story briefly with us. But let's continue where we're at right now. And I'm just amazed right now, George, I don't know if you was a few steps away from Billy Graham, how close you was, but certainly there wasn't anything that was going to stop that act of violence. And the way the devil was guiding you and pulling you at that time, but God changed your mind. What in the world did you guys think? Now, you got 9 other gang members that are with you. God spoke to you. Let me ask you this now. What about them? How did God stop them? Did God speak to all of y'all? How did he stop not just you, but the rest of them from doing that act, from assassinating Billy Graham that night?
Charles, I have no idea. But that night, 9 out of the 10 of us got converted.
Wow.
You know, and I remember after I'd spoken to the council. Now first of all, they treated me like a little boy, you know, because I was so small. And I had to tell them, look, I'm not a little boy, I'm 17 and a half, you know. I'm almost a man. And I wanted to treat me that way. So he did. And he was a great counsellor. And he said to me, he said, this is not going to be easy for you. This is going to be so hard for you. You're going to have to face problems that you've never had to face before. And the great thing about it was the other 8 guys who also came forward. Now, how God dealt with them, I have no idea. To this day, I have no idea. All I know is that after it had finished, we all met in a huddle and we hugged each other and we all cried like little babies. And we made a pact then that we would never, ever, ever do anything that would hurt anybody again. Never. The only guy that didn't make the commitment, he put his gun down and ran. He just ran. He was just so afraid. But going home, it was an interesting story going home. But I want to tell you a story about what we did. One of the terrible things we did, or maybe even a couple. One of them was a big gang fight we had in the middle of Footscray, in Paisley Street, Footscray, and we caught the leader of the gang, the other gang, and we held his hand down on the ground, and we ran a car backwards and forwards over his hand, and we broke every bone in his hand. Now, he couldn't go to the hospital because the moment he did, he would be arrested.
Wow.
And so he grew up for the rest of his life with his hand, his fingers almost bent back 90 degrees, the way the bones sort of formed after that. And that was a terrible thing, and I asked God to forgive me for that, and I believe He did.
What did
Because
with that story right there, George, there was no remorse in your heart for what you had done in this particular situation with this man, in the violence that was associated with that type of living in that gang lifestyle. Obviously, because you didn't care that, you was going to assassinate Billy Graham, for goodness sakes. But God, but here's what I like about your story. God changes lives. God changes lives completely. He not only touched your life, but everybody involved except for the one person. That's very interesting that there's always one person that either comes and asks God's forgiveness, or only one does. In this case, one did not, the rest of you did. But God asked you to do something else. He asked you to do something else about that young man that you had committed the violence against, you and the gang. What was it that he told you to do, then you acted upon it? Share that with us.
We all walked up from the Melbourne Cricket Ground to the Flinders Street railway station, which is quite a distance, and we shared a lot of stuff together, and I caught the train home, and I remember getting out at Middle Footscray Station and walking up Victoria Street. And not walking, I was really floating up Victoria Street. I was so, it was just like a whole new life to me, new life. And then suddenly the voice appeared again and said, "George, I want to talk to you." He said, "First of all," I've got two things I want. He said, "First of all, I want you to be a Salvation Army officer." And I said, "You've got to be joking." And God said quite sternly to me, "I do not joke." Oh, he put me back in my box, I tell you. It really did. And I thought, oh yes, okay, well. I said, "I can't be a Salvation Army officer." I said, "I can't talk." I said, "My language is not church language." I said, "Can you imagine me standing up in a church preaching a sermon the way I talk?" And he said, "That's not a problem. We can take care of that." And I said, "Anyway," I said, "I'm only 4'11". I couldn't see even above the pulpit. And God said to me, "That's okay, George. I can handle that also." And that year, Charles, I grew 10.5 inches. 10.5 inches in 1 year. It was just amazing.
That is amazing.
I said, "Okay, now what's the second thing? It can't be any worse than that." And so God said to me, "I want you now to go down tomorrow," and I'll call him no name, because I have never ever told anybody any of the names of the gang members, never. And that was part of our pact we made. And so I'll call this guy no name. And I said to him, "You've got to be," and I said, "No, you don't joke, do you? You don't kid." And I said, "But God, if I go down there, he'll kill me." God said, "No, he won't." I said, "But couldn't I just write him a letter?" God said, "No, I want you to go down and see him and talk to him." Well, the next day, now this is the next day after the crusade, mind you, right? No breathing space. So I went down and I knocked on the door, and his mother came to the door, and she was very angry. And she had, rightly so, she had every right to be angry. And the young man called out, "Who's there?" And she said who it was, and he said, "Show him in." And when I first went in there, he was pretty testy about it. And then we got talking, and I shared with him what had happened to me at the Billy Graham crusade. And he said, I don't believe that. I said, well, it's true. It's really, really true. And I said, I've been told I've got to come down to you and apologise to you for what we did to you. And he said, you know, George, if we'd have caught you, we'd have done the same thing to you.
Interesting.
You know, he said, it's amazing. And you know, Charles, it simply amazes me that God used that incident to lead this young man to the Lord. I led him to the Lord. A day-old Christian. And I led someone to the Lord. And I thought, wow, this is good stuff. Maybe this army officer's business is not too bad after all. You know? Yeah, so, and we became best of friends after that. We really did.
Isn't that something? How God can take somebody's heart and just change it to such an extent. So out of that experience, 10 people actually got saved. One ran away and did not accept the Lord and ran away from the situation. And God, I guess God had all intentions, George. I'm being a little funny here, but I guess God had all intentions of 10 people coming to him on that night and the following night. One left, God brought the other guy in, and he took his, and he got saved. What a tremendous story. What a tremendous story.
Strangely enough, we call that guy that ran Judas.
Say that again?
We call Judas because he ran.
Oh, okay. I hear you. I hear you. What a story.
Yeah.
What an impact of how God has changed your life. And you have been a minister ever since, touching people's lives.
It's been amazing.
My situation was I had, in my testimony, which is certainly a different spin than yours is, I started serving the Lord when I was just 14 years old. I preached every place that I possibly could. I preached in Harlem. I preached in the Bronx. I stomped the streets looking for bad people. I myself had never ever taken any drugs or smoked or anything, just never did. But I didn't need that to relate to people that had. That was on the wayward way of life. In your situation, and then I walked away from God. I left the ministry, and God called me back, and came across your story, and you shared this story. I think this is the second time that you shared this story for publication. I think that you told me, for that matter. But George, I want to thank you for sharing your story and what it has done for so many people's lives. It's going to change people's lives. God has certainly touched you and changed you, and changed all those young men's lives. A world away, and we become best of friends, and God put us together. I want to thank you for doing that. What a tremendous testimony. Go ahead and say one final thing to the group and to anyone listening to this video right now.
Well, I've just counted a great thrill and an honor, Giles, to know you, to know your ministry and the people you're reaching, your hearts that you're touching. And I just want to say to them, you know, well, Charles is reaching out to you. You reach out to the Lord, because he's got his hands reaching out to you. You know, there's a little chorus we used to sing once upon a time. Reach out and touch the Lord as he goes by. You'll find he's not too busy to hear your heart's cry. He's passing by this moment. Your need he'll supply. Reach out and touch the Lord as he goes by. And he will give you life. He will give you peace. He will give you joy. He'll give you a meaning for life and what it's all about. And he'll change your life and make it into a wonderful, wonderful, absolute marvelous life as you live the rest of your life.
Yes, he will. Thank you, George. This is George Palmer, and he agreed to share his ministry, his life-changing experience with the Ministry Road, how God took a heart that was hardened and softened it and made it a heart of love. Thank you, George. Thank you for being with us today, and the group loves you. I appreciate you.
God bless you, and thank you for the opportunity.